Hi everyone and welcome to This Week in Habsland. I'm Brian, he's Jordan, and as always we are here with you every Monday to discuss any and all things Montreal Canadiens. Check us out on the socials, on Blue Sky and on TikTok at HabslandPod. Now on today's episode, we are going to be covering the important Habs moves and news that occurred this week, and then we're going to be doing a very, very deep dive into the NHL trade deadline as we witnessed a crazy one. In-division blockbuster trades, huge stars changing teams, lots of compelling storylines. But first, I'll let Jordan kick us off with a time-related disclaimer here, and then we're going to get into the Habs topics.
Okay, so we are recording this part of the podcast. We don't usually timestamp, but I think it's important to do it right now. At 6:45 p.m. on Friday evening after the trade deadline, we're timestamping it because somehow, some way, this absolutely wild trade deadline, the details are still trickling in, and Brian and I wanted to record as soon as possible while it's very fresh in our minds. But that also meant that some news, like the Brad Marchand trade, is kind of still being finalized. So if we're getting any details wrong, some of it might just be our mistake, but other elements might legitimately mean it's because not all the details are available. But let's forget zooming out. Let's zoom all the way in to what the Canadiens did or did not do at this trade deadline. Brian, the centerpiece of the Canadiens trade discussion all season has been around Jake Evans and whether or not they would re-sign him to a new contract or a contract extension, I guess. And we got that answer earlier this week. How did you feel about the deal?
I felt great about the Jake Evans contract. For those who don't know, it's a 4-year deal, $2.85 million a year. If you remember, Jake Evans asked for 5 years at $4 million. And generally, when a player asks for something and the team is fairly motivated to re-sign them, they get one or the other. They either get the term they wanted or they get the money they wanted.
Yep.
Jake Evans got neither. He got $1,150,000 less than he wanted per year. So that becomes, between 4 and 5 million gross. And that becomes even more because he also didn't get the term he wanted. He didn't get 5 years. He only got 4 years. So this is kind of another really smart long-term signing from Kent Hughes, who just seems to know he's got his finger on the pulse of the future of the Montreal Canadiens. And so even though Jake Evans is not a flashy first, second line center who's going to play 20 minutes a night, score a bunch of goals, get a lot of assists, he's still a member of this team that will help you win a cup potentially in the next few years. Remember, Demidov is coming next year. Everybody's going to be a year older. So Kent Hughes is thinking of next year and the 3 after that with this signing. So I think it's brilliant. Did you feel the same way, man?
Yeah, I think so. How I've kind of approached it, or at least how I hoped Kent Hughes approached this trade deadline, the situation was that Evans was kind of isolated from everything else. If you could sign him to a contract, you obviously keep him. If you can't, you move him. And that seems to be how it played out. That the Canadiens got now maybe they had to add a year. Maybe that was kind of the slight concession. I think we've seen reports about this is the exact first contract the Canadiens offered. I'll take that with a grain of salt. But he's getting 2.85. Immediately that is a good deal. If we're doing our Habs trade value ranking, I don't think he jumps above too many people, but he's at the top of the group right below the bubble stars at this point, right? That's so the Goulet, Laine, Slavkovsky, Reinbacher, Hage, he's the very next guy on that list. I think I would put him at number 11. He's above Sam Montembeault now. He's definitely above Mike Matheson. Those were that's kind of the next tier, but Evans is there now. It's a phenomenal contract. Look, he was at 1.7 million. I was going to 2.85 million. The cap is 25% higher than it was when he signed that deal. So even when you take that percentage increase, it's really not much of a pay raise. Look, this is also part of building a good team culture and of guys wanting to play for the team and stick around with the team. And that's what leadership of Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield and Mike Matheson and all these guys sticking around and having a good time in St. Louis, and the coaching staff being very player friendly. And, it's not so super authoritarian the way we might think of a Michel Therrien or a John Tortorella. Because of that, and Evans talked about it, he was willing to maybe take a little bit less money to stick around. So full notes, perfect. I'm super happy. Jake Evans, 7th round pick. He got that first, big contract. Well, big, at least relative to a 7th round pick right out the gate. and then has played great hockey for what is expected of him. I've seen things online of like, okay, fourth line center, 2.85 million. Like a fourth line, it's a little understated to just call him a fourth line center. Now he's not too much more than that, but the importance he brings to the team's penalty kill cannot be understated. He is their number one center when it comes to the penalty kill. It's a great contract. I'm super thrilled for him. And it was just like, it made too much sense to not do it. Like if the reports had come out after this, Brian, that the Canadians traded Jake Evans for whatever, and Evans wanted 4 years at 2.85 million, and the Canadians did not do it, we'd be infuriated at Hughes and Gorton right now.
Sure. I mean, it depends on what the return would have been, but
no, if it's an average return, like it would have been like a second and a fourth. You have an actual hockey player. It's always sometimes cool to think about getting draft picks and 18-year-old and 19-year-old prospects, but you have a guy who's in the league who's really good at what he is supposed to do. You got to sign him to a very team-friendly deal, who, by the way, there is also, I don't think there's any type of no trade or no move on it. So not that something you're looking into, but you have the flexibility and you want to maintain that flexibility. So that's great.
If somehow by the grace of God, the Montreal Canadiens find a, certified, very good second line center within the next year or two, and Kapanen pans out and Beck pans out in the bottom six, do you know how unbelievably easy it will be to trade away Jake Evans? Should they choose to do so? And I'm not advising that, but just should that be the path that they want to take? A $2.85 million contract for the few years that are left will be so easy to trade. They'll be able to get amazing value for that. So yeah, you said it best, man. No notes needed. This is a really, really great contract. I think for both Jake Evans and the Canadians, I mean, from his perspective, I'm sure he could have gotten more money elsewhere, but he probably sees what we all see in Montreal is that, yeah, maybe this isn't the year, but next year, the year after, 5 years from now, this could be a contender.
Yeah. I don't really have too much else to say on Evans. Like, it's a great contract. There's nothing controversial about it. We're all happy sticking around, and he's with the team as a bottom six center for the foreseeable future. The rest of the guys, Armia, Savard, really just those two. Dvorak, too, is technically an unrestricted free agent in the summer. Any surprise? I mean, they also didn't bring anybody in. Like, my thing when we talked about it, 4 or 5 weeks ago, what do the Canadians need to do to make the playoffs? I think one of them was about Suzuki hitting 90 points, which, by the way, looking good. The other one was don't rock the boat. And I meant, I think this is the team for this year. Not that I think this team is good enough to make the playoffs and be like a legit contender, but for where they are at this stage, I think we're good. So it doesn't mean don't do anything. It just means be careful with what you're doing. And I think that's exactly what Kent Hughes did. It was absolutely a seller's market on Friday, and the Canadians could have potentially taken advantage of that. But I think they just kind of read the room. And we're also talking about a team that's played so well since the Four Nations that it kind of made sense, right? To just kind of take your foot off the gas a little bit and say, hey, look, if nothing is perfectly lining up for us, we shouldn't do anything.
Yep, absolutely. And you had mentioned that Jake Evans was sort of the focal point of the trade deadline, which I think is true. I think there was another focal point for a completely different reason, Nick Suzuki. It's not the reason anybody's thinking of. It's not because he was implicated in a trade. It's because Kent Hughes basically told Nick Suzuki that the ball is in his court.
Yeah.
That was a part of his presser today where he said that I had one with Nick talking about a conversation that he had a discussion, and I just repeated what I've mentioned before. I said, it's on your shoulders. Don't come tell me what I should or shouldn't do if you haven't done what needs to be done. They won 5 in a row after that discussion. And I think Nick had 13 points in 5 games. So we were happy to see that, and not just for the team, but for Nick as captain, how he reacted to that. End quote. So first of all, this just shows how much faith he has in Nick Suzuki. It shows that Nick Suzuki also did come to him. I don't think they would have had this discussion if Nick Suzuki hadn't sort of banged on the door and said, listen, give us a shot here. We want to do this. Don't go trading away Jake Evans, Yoel Armia, all these guys, Savard. And the third thing, man, did he come through. 13 points in 5 games. Are you kidding me? They won all 5. Absurd. And even though the winning streak came to an end, the dream is not dead, right? They went to overtime, they got that point against the Oilers. They're still in the mix here. There's a handful of points that separates everybody. So I love that Kent Hughes, A, is listening to his captain in this way, and B, that Nick Suzuki did in fact deliver. And therefore Kent Hughes, it's not that his hands were tied, but he respects him enough to say, you know what? You delivered, man. And now I think it goes without saying he has to deliver for the next 20 games, because by not doing anything, if the Canadiens miss the playoffs, they've successfully meandered. So it's time now to keep delivering and hopefully end up in a playoff spot here. What do you think of that quote?
I think it's great that there's that level of communication between the front office and your captain. Now, I would always expect the captain to say, give us a shot. You're never going to find a captain say, you know what? Yeah, screw these guys. Like, they're not re-signing. Get them out of here. Let's sim the rest of the season and be done with it. So I would never expect that. But the way Suzuki and Caulfield and a few other, obviously Lane Hudson, like they've delivered since the Four Nations, it did kind of force Kent Hughes' hand a little bit, where it's like, look, if they come out the gate after the Four Nations and they lose 3 out of 4 instead of winning 4 or 5 in a row, like it completely changes the narrative. And it gives Hughes an opportunity to maybe back out of some of those negotiations with Jake Evans and listen to more offers about Evans and Armia. I think it's great. I think this team is now set up in a position for these last 20 games to really give it a run. And it should be exciting to watch. 2 other Canadiens related things, Brian, not necessarily trade deadline related, but kind of anything else about the Habs and the trade deadline before we move on.
For sure. So the Canadiens papered Owen Beck and Jakub Dobeš to make them eligible to play for the Rocket.
Yep.
So when the Rocket, not if, when the Rocket, because they have the best points percentage in the AHL right now, make the Calder Cup playoffs, assuming the Canadiens don't, Beck and Dobeš are eligible to play for them. So that's a really good move. And he also said that Oliver Kapanen, who's, lighting it up in the SHL, he's having a great year, he will be available to play once his season comes to an end in Europe. So that's 3 great players who are also going to add to the Rocket. So I know that's not specifically Canadiens related, but that has to do a lot with the development of those players.
It does, 100%. We kind of alluded to it last week. Like we really thought Beck would definitely get sent down for the Rockets playoff. Dobeš, we had like a brief, like, is that going to happen? And they clearly are setting it up for, especially if the Canadiens miss the playoffs, for Dobeš to be sent down. On the Rocket front, Reinbacher had his best game since coming back earlier this week. And he's not going anywhere other than Laval for the rest of the season, but that was a really, really good sign. The other quick Habs note to hit on is on Reinbacher's future pairing buddy, and that is Caden Gooley. Man, like between David Reinbacher recovering so fast from knee surgery and Gooley's leg being cut open and gutted like a fish to like, skating again like 4 weeks later. Unbelievable.
Yeah, they're the quick recovery kids, man. A lacerated quadriceps to a lot of people would mean several months out. To Caden Gooley, it's like a little flu. Yeah. So thrilled about that. Hopefully he's back in a Habs jersey in a contact sweater at practice soon, and then soon enough with the team itself. So that's also great news. Should we expand the view a little bit, jump into a discussion about the surrounding teams of the Montreal Canadiens here?
Yeah, so we alluded to it a bit earlier. This trade deadline was nuts. Like, every 15 minutes, you were like, wait, what? Who got traded? Wait, they traded what for who? Like, and I don't know, fortunately, unfortunately for the Montreal Canadiens, every team in the Atlantic other than Detroit just went ballistic on Friday. And that's where we should start. Brian, now there's a few doors we can open, right? We can go through, and different vantage points, I guess, as well. We can look at Toronto and what they did, Boston, Florida, and I'd like to group Ottawa and Buffalo together. So those are your 4 options. You can talk about Tampa if you want. I just won't care. Who do you want to talk about first?
I think the rest of the league sort of doesn't care about Tampa either, so we'll leave them on the back burner. Definitely Buffalo, Ottawa is a pairing. I think Florida and Boston are a pairing because Boston traded Brad Marchand to the Florida Panthers, an in-division trade, and they only got a second-round pick conditional. And yeah, Marchand had the upper body injury recently. He's been out. It's the last year on his deal. So I do understand why it's not the first that I would have expected, just seeing like headline, Brad Marchand traded. But wow, going to the Panthers, that's kind of insane to me. The last piece of that really hated group of the Boston Bruins that the Canadiens battled with through the sort of mid-2000s or mid-2010s, I should say. It's so weird. It's going to be incredibly weird for him, not to be in a Boston Bruins jersey. And I should talk about that condition. The condition being that if he doesn't bite anybody next season, that second turns into a first.
If he doesn't bite, it becomes a first?
If he doesn't bite, it becomes a first.
All right. So congrats on the 57th pick. So I'd like to look at this through Boston's lens quickly. I mean, like, generally the theme of the whole Atlantic division is how much interdivisional trading there was. We're going to talk about Ottawa and Buffalo in a bit. Boston sends their captain, Brad Marchand, to division rival Florida, and then Brandon Carlo goes to Toronto. So, like, I think the price was was fair for Marchand to the Panthers. Like, he's just going to be like deluxe Corey Perry basically on this Florida Panthers team, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah,
I think that's what I mean. Corey Perry's had a hell of a like final stretch here of his career of just being, just a complete like bleep disturber and usually being on cup losing teams. Brad Marchand, I think, has an avenue to do that. Now, you said it's expiring. I wouldn't be surprised if he sticks around, although I don't know what Florida's cap situation is, especially with the Seth Jones trade, which is the other big thing Florida did. Yeah, it's, look, a line you and I were talking about, like a line of Bennett, Kachuk, and Marchand is just one you want to just throw your head up against a pole. Like, it's one that no one will enjoy playing, and I find it hilarious that kind of like the one season that the Leafs are like, yes, finally, no Boston in the first round. that there's a good chance, depending on how they line up, that they're still going to have to go up against Brad Marchand anyways, which is just incredible. That's the interdivisional stuff. I like it from Florida's part. A second round pick for Florida is like, who cares? These teams, them, Vegas, they've just kind of figured out like, we can keep these picks or we can just keep trading. And you got to hit on these trades, but you can kind of punt on some of these draft picks to kind of keep your team relevant and do so. Like, Florida's been to the Cup final, 2 years in a row now. It's not unheard of for a team to go 3 years in a row. It's the 4-year mark where it becomes incredibly kind of generational for a team to go to a Cup final that many years in a row. Florida set up to do that. They got Jones and they got Marchand, pieces that they needed, and that's kind of scary. Boston, on the other hand, and the Islanders too, not that we don't want to go too far outside of the division, good recognition of like, you know what? Not all teams are this like they don't totally understand the situation that they're in, where they're like, you know what, this really isn't the year. And I think we can do a bit of a soft like boop and just kind of change things. Doesn't defend what they did with Brandon Carlo. I still think that's a weird trade that they made, and we can maybe transition into that. But like, generally good on Boston for being like, we're gonna take a step back for a second, trade some guys that have had value to the club, and reassess things in the offseason.
It's kind of neat too when you look at the standings in the East. I know we're talking about the Atlantic specifically, but sort of that awareness from the Islanders and the Bruins, and meanwhile they're only a couple points apart from the Canadiens, the Red Wings, who did basically nothing. And then there's other teams around there that are buying. So like within the span of whatever 2-3 points, there's a bunch of teams that bought, there's a bunch of teams that sold, and there's a bunch of teams that did nothing. So it's kind of interesting to see the different philosophies here behind these teams, and it's very neat that a lot of them are in the Atlantic. So yeah, that's the other thing too about the Carlo trade. Minton and a first coming back from Toronto. So Toronto has successfully made it so that they once again only have one good prospect in their organization, and that's Easton Cowan. So good for you guys. Mediocre in 5 years, can't wait. And that's sort of hilarious from Toronto's perspective.
Okay, sure.
But Carlo is excellent. Carlo is excellent. So,
and under contract.
What did they need? They needed defense. Yeah. Serendipitously, it seems like goaltending is not as big an issue for Toronto anymore. They do not have an issue at forward. They never have, at least in the past 10 years. Defense was their issue. They absolutely strengthened that. So Toronto just became scarier. I was sort of laughing with a buddy the other day about how little Toronto scared me and how it's going to be another mediocre BS playoff run. They might have a shot with this one move. They might have a shot now. And that sounds gross because we're Habs fans, obviously, but like, let's just be real. Carlo changes things.
So adding on top of that, they didn't just go out and get Carlo today. They also went out and got Scott Lawton from Philadelphia. Third line center, let's call him. Another first round pick out the door. So if we're keeping track, we're not talking about him, but Tampa trades a first, Florida trades a first, Toronto traded 2 firsts.
Yep.
And I think that's it in terms of first round picks. So some seconds that went flying around as well. It's a bit of a chips in year for Toronto. That's what it kind of feels like when you put out 2 first round picks and one of your 2 or 3 best prospects, like a top tier for them at least prospect and Fraser Minton. That's a bit of like, John Tavares needs a new contract. Mitch Marner needs a new contract. This is a kind of this is put up or shut up time. Like, it is an opportunity. Now, unfortunately, all these teams are in the same bloody division, and that means maybe someone wild cards out, but probably not. But you're going to have Toronto, Florida, probably round 2 at this point. And someone who just traded a bunch of first round picks is going to get bounced before the conference final. But that's hockey. I like if I was in the GTA and rooted for the club nearby, because I can't say if I was a Leafs fan, I'd be satisfied with these trades. And it's like, okay, this is it. You guys got to do it now. There's no more excuses.
Exactly. There's no blaming the GM this year. Zero. That stuff about, well, they didn't give them enough of a chance. All they had was forwards. They didn't give them goaltending. They didn't give them defense. That storyline, that's dead now. It's up to the players on the team to deliver.
Yeah. So that's Florida. Some Boston we did in there. We looped in Toronto. Let's go to the 2 teams that went into the Thunderdome and just rammed into each other because they didn't know what the hell they wanted to do this trade deadline. Ottawa and Buffalo. We talked about Dylan Cousins as a potential trade opportunity or an option there for the Montreal Canadiens. What ended up happening, and I want to make sure I get the details of this trade right. The Ottawa Senators acquired Dylan Cousins, Dennis Gilbert, and a second-round pick from the Sabres for Josh Norris and then defenseman Jacob Bernard-Docker. So essentially it's Norris for Cousins in a second, plus a couple other small things. But what did you think of this trade, Brian? Because there's just a lot to think about. It's like, this is like one of those movies that has like kind of an open-ended ending where you're like, how am I supposed to feel about this? Like there's multiple interpretations of it almost, right? Like this is the Inception ending of hockey trades.
Yeah, or Good Will Hunting. Robin Williams just said, son of a gun, just he stole my line. I forget the exact quote, but as he's driving away. That's exactly what this is. This is also just purely like the simplest definition of this trade. This is a change of scenery trade for Josh Norris and Dylan Cousins. That's all this is, man. Ottawa's hoping that Cousins is going to come to Ottawa and be better than Norris, and Buffalo hopes the same for Norris over Cousins. Like, it's really simple. They're 6'2", 6'3". They're both centermen. They both have roughly similar ceilings. They're 24 or 25 years old. Like, they're so similar. Even the like number of points per games played. Norris has had a more successful season than Cousins, but what is Cousins surrounded by? Kind of just a cesspool of mediocrity in Buffalo that they're struggling to find any form of success. So you can't pin it on him specifically. Like you said, they kind of just crashed into each other because they didn't know what they wanted to do. I see this differently. I think this is a win-win for both teams, which sucks because they're both Atlantic. Like, we've talked about 5 teams now, and we haven't even mentioned Tampa because screw them, but they all won. And then Detroit kind of won as well because they got Mrazek back. they did it, guys. They got exactly what they wanted. They got Mrazek. No, but back to Cousins, Norris. Like, that's all this was. Change of scenery. From the players' perspective, I hope they both do okay with their new organizations. Just don't beat down the Habs too much. I'm sad we didn't land Cousins because that was a topic of discussion. But realistically, am I to give up a guy like Norris? Like, who would the Canadians have had to give up? A healthy Kirby Dach.
But that's the thing. Like, I've seen the the Habs would have that, the equivalent would have been like, Kirby Dach plus a second plus maybe a little bit more. And it's like, if you think Kirby Dach and Josh Norris have the same trade value, like, I got a oceanfront view in Idaho to sell you, man. Like, that's just not the case. Josh Norris is, super injury prone. He's injured right now. Like, I think he's supposed to come back sometime right now. Or maybe he has returned, but like, he got hurt early February-ish, and it was like, oh my gosh, no, Josh Norris again. And like we talked about it with Dylan Cousins when we were bringing it up a few weeks ago, of like, his main skill right now is that he's a fine center. He's definitely been frustrating over the past year or so, but he's relatively healthy. And I don't even know if I have to put the term relatively in there. He's a fairly healthy hockey player, knock on wood, all good luck to him. But like, the contracts are pretty similar as far as I can tell, to 7.1 to 7.7 or something like that. So it's negligible. Yeah, change of scenery, sure, but it's also like one team looking at another team being like, I'm not super happy with this guy. What do you think? It's like, well, I'm not super happy with this guy. Hey, you want to switch? Yeah, sure, why not? Like, right. It's both teams are trading early to mid 20s centermen on long-term contracts where they've given them a lot of money and they've been mildly disappointed by their output thus far. So I just feel like there's a chance that this is oh my gosh, it's Josh Norris and Dylan Cousins. This could be an absolute nothing burger of a trade. 18 months from now.
Yeah, really good.
Right? That we end this season and then they all go through next season, and we're like, I guess just Dylan Cousins is getting 50 points a season on the Senators, and Josh Norris looks good for like 6 weeks and then gets hurt and stuff like that. Like, also Buffalo's purgatory for hockey, so we'll never hear of Josh Norris ever again anyways.
Do you want to talk about the Mrazek thing? Because that's the most exciting thing to happen in the Atlantic, I think.
No, I think we've covered the Atlantic. The point is, the Atlantic was a bloodbath on trade deadline day. First round was flying around, and the amount of intradivisional trading, the normalization of it, which I rather appreciate, because I can never imagine a world where the Habs trade with the Leafs or the Sens, and then today happened, and Boston's trading with both Florida and Toronto, and just like, we're just gonna do the trades that make the most sense to us. It is what it is. I like that. Okay, if you're ready to, let's zoom out one more time. I was gonna say, like, where else do you want to go? We're gonna talk about Rantanen, like that we have to. This Rantanen stuff, like, I have so many thoughts. Like, if I can start, let me do my my corner on this one. The flippin' reporting on this stupid Rantanen trade for the past 24 hours, literally every single reporter was just making stuff up. They were just making stuff up the entire time. Like, I could not believe how much crap was leaking. Every 15 minutes, a different reporter had a different report. He's definitely going to Dallas. He's not going to Dallas. We're exploring other avenues. Logan Stankoven's involved in the deal. They couldn't agree to a trade extension. They're looking at other teams. What about the Kings? Like, every 10 minutes, I was like, oh my God, I can't keep up with what's going on. Just shut up and tell me what happens at 3:00. It was really weird that there was that much leakage, and trying to figure out, like, who in the, me, right? Like, who the hell is leaking this stuff? Like, what the hell is going on here? Like, I couldn't even figure it out, because it seemed like they had agreed to what the actual, like, traded components would be. That it was Stankoven plus picks, and then it was like, well, I guess Rantanen. Right. So was it Rantanen and his agent negotiating through the public? Was that what was going on? Because, like, I guess I haven't actually said what the trade was, right? It's 2 first-round picks and Logan Stankoven. Both first-round picks are top 10 protected, going to Carolina. Rantanen's going to Dallas, and then I believe, whether this is official or not, is going to sign an 8-year extension for $12 million a year. Lots of money. Yeah. So that was just, like, quite frankly, kind of exhausting.
For sure, and nauseating. I mean, the thing you always say when one of these things happens, or in this case, like, dozens upon dozens of crappy articles written, who benefits from this leak happening? And in this case, sure, you could look at Rantanen and, getting the money he wanted, getting to a contender, the Stars look unbelievable now, all that stuff. But I think it's just as basic as the reporters wanting to report on something, wanting to have something for people to click on, so they're benefiting, quote unquote, from this. They're clowns, I think, is the proper term. I could check the dictionary, but I think that's the proper term for reporters reporting on nothing and making things up. They're clowns. But it's basically unavoidable at the trade deadline. Like, if you were hoping for this not to occur, Jordan, you have not been paying attention in years past. So we could have expected this, that everybody was going to come out of the woodwork and make a bunch of stuff up. So it sucks. It's boring. It's lame, but it is what it is.
If I can just use one example, this is from 4:45 a.m. from Darren Dreger on, I guess this will be Friday morning. There is no deal between Dallas and Carolina for Mikko Rantanen. It appears Carolina may have to go back to the drawing board. Doesn't mean a deal or extension with Dallas can't materialize, but it's not there as of now.
So that literally was pulled. He copy pasted that from a document in his whatever drive that he has named Things I Always Say. And he just sort of enters the names of the players. I think all reporters kind of do that. They have a sheet where they have all these basic, nothing actually occurred. That could have summarized that entire quote that you just made. Nothing occurred. 2 words. Very simple. Yeah. Nothing occurred.
So, okay, let's go back. Sorry, that was just, I had to do that part. Let's do the actual trade.
Yeah, there's nothing more fun than you and I talking about how reporters talk about nothing. So let's get back to talking.
It's a very meta discussion.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about something. So I want to say, I let you kick it off. Can I just say this? Congratulations to the Dallas Stars and
Stanley
to their
Cup
general
champs.
Manager, Jim Nill, for winning the trade deadline.
Yep.
It's not even close. The closest team is Florida, and you didn't land Rantanen. Sorry.
No.
Stars land Rantanen, signed him 8 years, $12 million a year. Perfectly fair deal. Very good deal. They then signed Wyatt Johnson to a 5-year deal. They acquired Granlund, and they got Cody Ceci. Who cares? Granlund and Ceci, like, depth pieces. But the 2 big things, Rantanen and 5 years for Wyatt Johnston, are you kidding me? This has to be the cup contender now. And we were talking before about like in the division, intra-division trades.
Yeah.
This is kind of an intra-division trade with one.
I know how
with one
how
leap
pissed
away.
is Colorado right now.
They're gonna have to face him in round one.
So here's the thing,
like they do every year.
I agree. Colorado's all I kept thinking about was like poor Connor Hellebuck. Every year we get to March and we look at the Central Division and we're like, Tabarnak. Like these guys, Connor Hellebuck will never get an easy path to a conference final. It's always like, well, here's your death march. You got to go through probably, they might go against each other, which would help Winnipeg this year, which we weren't able to do last season, where they had to go up against Colorado in the first round. But yeah, it's Colorado's got to be fuming right now, right? Like, I think they're happy with their trade. Like, look, I don't know what the hell was going on with the Rantanen and stuff. I don't know what to read into like why he didn't sign the extension. If like 8x12 is what ended up working, I can't imagine Colorado was that far away from that. But anyways, they ended up with Martin Necas. They seem happy, and Dallas is the team to watch now in the West. Like they have a goalie. They have tons of firepower up front. They have some absolute killers on a defensive end. Look, they were in the conference final last year. It's not like they were far off. So
no, they didn't need this. Let's be clear. They didn't need to add Rantanen to have a shot at the cup, but they did, and now they have just that much more of a shot. So just congrats to you guys. Jim Nill, a clinic. Yeah. Seriously, a clinic.
On the other end, Carolina. A lot of people are going to dunk on them, and I think that's mostly valid. However, if we roll back the tape 12 months, and I told you, hey, you're going to turn Martin Necas, a player who probably doesn't want to re-sign in Carolina. Maybe there's a trend forming, by the way, of players not wanting to re-sign in Carolina. Necas did not want to re-sign in Carolina, or one of the huge deal that Carolina was just not able to do. Again, I think that's a separate discussion. That they were able to flip Martin Necas into 2 first-round picks. Now, they're going to be late first-round picks, and that does matter here. 2 third-round picks and Logan Stankoven. I think you're going to be like, look, it's not ideal. Anytime you trade the best player in the trade, you more than likely are going to lose the trade.
Right.
But it's half decent. That is the most glass half full we're going to get about Carolina for the next 3 to 5 minutes. Brian, have at it.
They traded for Rantanen and lost him.
Yes.
The story ends there.
Yep.
Cut.
Yep.
Cut. Print. That's it. Like they had Rantanen, one of the top 10 players in the NHL year after year, one of the most consistent playoff performers, a guy you would love to have on your top line in the playoffs. And they lost him. Stankoven's great. They're going to love him. Those firsts might turn into something, the thirds less so. But hey, you never know. Carolina tends to draft well. All that being said, they lost Rantanen. That's all I really give a crap about here.
When you lose the best player in a trade, you more than likely are going to lose the actual trade itself. That's just how it works. And there's nothing of comparison. Like Logan Stankoven's not having a great rookie season. Look, when we were doing at the beginning of the year, the Calder stuff, we presumed Michkov versus Celebrini. And I think we were all pretty confident in Stankoven as the 3. Before Will Smith, has had a pretty good run back. And of course, our boy making his way up the charts is probably the favorite at this point and battling with Celebrini. Stankoven was kind of viewed as the number 3. And he's just not had that type of season. Dustin Wolf has had a better season from him actually.
Right.
But yeah, you lost the best player. That's it.
He's young too. Let's say he's young. He has tons of runway. Just to be clear here, like Stankoven could still turn out to be a really good player, but yeah, lost the best player in the trade. Basically it. Who else lost? I like, we don't have to keep talking about the Canes. Who else lost here? Who do you think had a rough trade deadline? Either because they did nothing or they did something silly.
I mean, unrelated to the trade deadline, but just timed around it is the Devils losing Jack Hughes.
Yeah.
That's like, I'm just trying to think of like the Metro. You had the Atlantic just load up. Washington had some peripheral moves. Carolina just Depressionville. And that leaves Jersey. And Jersey unfortunately lost their captain this week for the rest of the season. I don't think they had any move. They signed Kovacevic. Well, I should mention that, by the way. We were talking about, hey, like it's the off season. What options are there for right-handed defensemen? We very much glossed over Jonathan Kovacevic in part because I don't think that was the type of player that is worth superseding David Reinbacher or Logan Mailloux. I also didn't think he'd get $4 million a year.
No, I mean, he wouldn't have from the Canadiens or any other team, but the value he brings to the Devils is significant. And they're like, their cap situation's fairly decent. So I think they could afford to do it. Yeah, I guess it was surprising. I thought probably
It's a lot of money.
three at best. It is a lot of money.
Yeah.
But like he plays higher up in their line. Like we're remembering him as the 5th, 6th D, 4th when there were injuries. He plays much higher in the Devils lineup. So there's that too. Yeah, on the Jack Hughes thing, awful. Like you and I and all Habs fans know so darn well, unfortunately, what it's like to lose a star player to a shoulder surgery. Like just beyond sucks. Hopefully he's ready for training camp in the fall. Like that's a sincere hope. And hopefully it doesn't take too long for him to get back to normal. Jack Hughes is one of my favorite non-Montreal Canadiens players in the league. He's super exciting. And it just sucks for him. So I feel for the guy big time. But yeah, that's a monstrous loss from a team that you and I both, what was it? You picked the Devils from the East, and I think I did too at the beginning of the season, of like either a dark horse or like a very likely to win the cup and surprise everybody. That's just kind of flown out the window now.
Yeah. I don't think that's in the cards. I don't know what to make of. I think it's just Florida. I think it's whoever wins Florida, Toronto at this point, and I have a tough time thinking Toronto can win 3 playoff rounds. I have no idea what to think about the Caps in the postseason. If they're a team that's actually built for that, it's just been so long since we saw a Washington team make a deep playoff run. And the Metro seems a little bit open right now. There's a chance the Rangers can go on a bit of a run and get out of the wild card. Lots of stuff. Maybe let's go shoot out west, because I want to maybe briefly, we can do the Jake Wallman trade to Edmonton if you want. I maybe would prefer if we go back to Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado's more. I don't care that much about the Wallman trade.
Brock Nelson.
Yeah.
Traded from the Islanders for Callum Ritchie and a first, couple other things in there. I think there's a 3rd round pick, but it's ostensibly that. Rumors were that the Islanders offered Nelson 3 years, around $7 million extension before they made the trade. I mean, like, if it was anyone other than Lou Lamoriello, I would have been saying like that's absolute BS. I don't believe that report, but I completely believe that Lou Lamoriello offered Brock Nelson $20 million at age 34.
Yeah.
Solid move. Good stuff for Colorado. Like you lost Mikko Rantanen in the grand scheme of things, just not great, but you've brought in Martin Necas, bringing in Brock Nelson. Got to load up. The Central is going to be a bloodbath. The Pacific might be a bit light, and that might actually benefit Edmonton, but the Central, Colorado had to do a little bit of work here, and they got Brock Nelson out of it.
Yeah, another definite winner at the trade deadline, Colorado, for this. I do like their forward group now. I think that Colorado.
Oh yeah, you like the team that has Nathan McKinnon as in their forward group?
No,
Good
I know,
you.
of course. Yeah, absolutely. One of, like maybe the best player this year, but I just mean that the obvious holes that existed upon losing Rantanen and. Yes, they filled it with nature, but like Brock Nelson just sort of is that extra guy that fills that gap, who's very durable. I'll say it that way.
Sure.
Like in a long playoff run, Nelson's the type of guy who's in it for the long haul, and hopefully doesn't get injured. Hopefully for their sake. But I really do like their forward group now. Make fun of me all you want because it's obvious, but
the reigning Hart Trophy winner
desirable.
And the guy who's currently leading all the entire NHL in points. And you're saying you like their forward group. What an edgy take, Brian. Jeez.
Here I am out on the fringes trying to keep up. I don't know. Like, look, Colorado, Dallas, Winnipeg.
Death. Just it sucks that
death.
You're going to
Awful.
have only one of them is going to be left in the conference final. Because you could make a strong argument to me that those are the 3 best teams in the Western Conference.
They are. I think that absolutely they are. And then add Washington as the 4th best team in the league. And not that they are 4th, but those are the top 4 in my estimation. That would be a very cool 2 pairs of conference finals, but the NHL doesn't work that way.
It does not. So before we get out of here, I know you wanted to talk about the you mentioned the Peter Mrazek trade, but I also know you want to talk about the Luke Shen trade. No, I'm kidding. Actually,
did I? I must have gone into a fugue state. I don't remember saying that.
I think that's it. Like, obviously, there was tons of other moves here, and there are a lot of ones that probably don't matter too much. But I think those were the big ones. The Atlantic was the bloodbath, and again, all basically trades with each other. Nelson, Rantanen being the other 2 big moves. Look, this is the trade deadline. Teams have loaded up, but you got to go out now. Last 20 games, fight for seeding. Fight for home ice, and Lord knows the Central, it's fight to win the division, because like otherwise you're getting an absolute, just like you're going to make your way to whoever makes the conference final. If you're in the 2-3, is just, you're going to play between 13 or 14 games of absolute hell.
Yeah,
And
for
I would
sure.
say that'll be the scariest division where seeding matters. And I would assume that Toronto and Florida are going to want to avoid each other. And that would want to be a 1-2 situation and no one slips. I don't think Tampa would jump over both of them, but there's a universe where, something could happen there. And
I mean, Tampa's red hot right now, man. And they're like, their goal differential is scary. They're nearly as good as Washington, plus 59 right now, and like a point behind Toronto.
Right.
It could be feasible, but
In the cards.
it's those three and then everybody else.
Yeah, in the cards. And then somehow, some way, the wild card is just going to be its own. I mean, bloodbath would be a strong word. Maybe like just 3 homeless guys throwing newspapers at each other. I think that's what the wild card will end up looking like a bit.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
With Philadelphia, the Islanders, and Boston being obvious sellers, with Detroit doing nothing and kind of meandering and falling out of that wild card spot right now, Ottawa buying, Columbus buying, Rangers still, crawling their way back. What are the Canadiens' chances right now? How do you feel about the Habs' chances at playoffs?
I think it's 1-5.
That's better than I thought you would say, actually.
Yeah.
I thought you'd be more bearish.
Listen, the one thing we're going to have to keep an eye on is the first tiebreaker is regulation wins. And I think basically every team in that group has more than the Habs. So that's a small factor. Remember last year, Detroit and Washington finished equal on points, but Detroit did not have the tiebreaker and Washington got in. That's a small detail in there that will matter. I wonder if there's going to be a New Jersey free fall. I don't know if it'll be enough for them to fall all the way out of the playoffs, but if memory serves me right, it's not that they're that far ahead of the Rangers.
No, they're not. It's 5-6 points that separates them from the crowd.
So this is going to come down to the wire, and a team's going to go on a 3-game winning streak or losing streak, and that might be it. Unfortunately, the loser point's going to play a huge role in all of this, and that kind of stinks. But Habs are likely going to be playing big games now down the stretch here, these final 18, 19 games, and this is the team they have for right now, and we need to figure out how good it is. And, the best case scenario is they get not a lot, but they get some playoff experience out of this right away. And that'd be great for a young core. And who knows if Caden Gooley's already skating, who knows what the odds of that would be, but we'll see. It's 1-5. So I say 1-5. What were you going to say?
Yeah, 1-4, 1-5 sounds about right. The amount of times that the Canadiens play a team that's sort of around there is quite a bit. We play Ottawa, we play Detroit at the end of the season. That's 2. We play Philadelphia, Boston. Those teams are probably out considering their sellers, but I'll consider them. Philadelphia again, the Islanders, Ottawa again. So like there's a substantial amount of games against these rivals who you're battling for playoff spots with. Those are the most important games now. 6 or 7 of them, those matter more than the other 13 that you have, because you have to it's a 4-point game. You have to take 2 points. You can't give a loser point. That's going to make the difference here. So I think the Canadiens have the drive, the focus to do it. 1-4, 1-5 sounds about right to me. So let's not get ahead of ourselves, right, but it would be darn fun. And they didn't have to trade away assets to do it. Like if they can do it, that like to bring it all back to the Habs and what they did or did not do at the trade deadline, as you said, they didn't give anything up to keep their chances at a decent amount, which I like.
Listen, they are now going to be playing, every game is going to be the biggest game of the season. And this is the team that they have. It's what they are going to be. It's that Suzuki Hughes conversation. I think it's just going to replay in a lot of people's heads for the next 5-6 weeks. This is your shot. What's really fun now is we get to stop talking about trades. And also importantly, and I don't want to jinx it, but like we also don't have to start shifting towards draft talk, Brian, which I know for you and I were like, oh, thank God. But we're talking about games in March that are going to matter. Now, there's a universe where by the time there's 6 games left, the Canadiens we kind of figure it out like it ain't happening. But until then, we're going to be here talking about every single game because every single game is going to be the biggest one of the season until the next one. And that's going to be an absolute blast to be a part of and watch. So we're really excited for that. Brian, I think we'll wrap up our episode here. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of This Week in Habsland. You can find us on social media at HabslandPod on Blue Sky and TikTok. If you like what you heard, please leave a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcast. And until next Monday, go Habs.